Wisconsin Broadcasters Association Hall of Famer Bob Berry ruled Milwaukee's airwaves in the 60s and 70s. He spoke with countless musicians and celebrities over the years. Bob collected remarkable recordings of these encounters, which he's now sharing with the public. Here's Bob.
Today is the 60th anniversary of the assassination of the 35th President of the United States, John F. Kennedy. In this podcast, you will hear excerpts of WOKY radio the way it sounded on this day 60 years ago. And I'll set the excerpts up for you so you'll know exactly what you're hearing. At the time, I was DJing the all-night show, midnight to 6 a.m., and I was taking a nap during the day. I was awakened by my mother's screams from the living room. She had been watching a soap opera when they cut in with the bulletin that the president had been shot. So I got dressed and immediately headed to the WOKY studios, at that time located at 76th and Grange. The staff there that afternoon included news director Bill James, newsman Bob Carpenter, and DJ Bob White. You'll hear their voices. I went from being a disc jockey to a newsman in minutes. My reporting on the late night show continued until after the funeral. For days, our rock and roll radio station, WOKY, played religious and classical music. At the end of the podcast, I have included my interesting conversation with Margarette Oswald, mother of the assassin Lee Harvey Oswald. First, we will hear from newsman Bob Carpenter, and he's announcing for the first time that it is probable that the president had been shot, but nothing was official at that time. He was very careful with the wording he used. Here's Bob Carpenter.
This is the WOKY newsroom. President Kennedy and Texas Governor John Connally at this moment are in an emergency room of the Parkland Hospital of Dallas, Texas. Physicians are fighting to save the lives of the two men who were gunned down by a sniper as they rode through the city in a motorcade. Mrs. Kennedy and Mrs. Connally were not injured. At 12:12 our time, a special carton of blood, apparently for transfusion purposes, was rushed into the emergency ward. 2 Dallas police officers carried the carton. Although Dallas is regarded as a center of strong political opposition to Mr. Kennedy, the heavy street crowds were overwhelmingly friendly, but there were a few anti-Kennedy placards. There was one report that the president was wounded in the head. Mrs. Kennedy was heard to scream as she reached for her husband. Stay tuned to WOKY for further details.
Bob White was in the middle of his radio show when the president was shot. You might remember he always said that he was announcing from the bird cage on the 5th floor of the WOKY building, even though we only had one floor. So on this day, Bob was brought into action as a newsman, giving us the bad news and asking people to stay off the phones, to leave the lines open for emergency. Here's Bob White.
We just have an announcement. Part of the news crew has been attempting to contact sources in Dallas. A moment ago, Bill Henry called down there, and the only person that he managed to talk to was a crying long-distance telephone operator who says that all news sources have been closed down in Dallas. And we might say for people in Milwaukee to please stay off the telephone because the circuits are all overloaded. It is impossible to call anyone. In case of an emergency, use the phone. Otherwise, stay off of it.
Thank you very much.
Next, you'll hear the long news tone signifying an important bulletin. Bob Carpenter makes the official announcement.
Ladies and gentlemen, this is Bob Carpenter of the WOKY newsroom. The President of the United States, John F. Kennedy, is dead. We are indeed very sorry. We shall now pause for a few moments.
WOKY was very cautious about spreading rumors. In this segment, Bob White gives the official explanation about why WOKY waited to say the president was dead. He does this after he again gives us the bad news.
The President of the United States, John F. Kennedy, is dead. He was 45 years of age. Conflicting reports had reached WOKY as early as 12:30 p.m. local time stating the death of the president. However, official and authentic word had not been released. In an effort not to be premature, WOKY had waited until the last possible moment to release the sad news. It was received 5 minutes ago.
In this segment, Bob Carpenter gives us a full newscast of the events that led up to the death announcement. Bob also explains why WOKY chose not to make an official announcement until all the facts could be confirmed.
Ladies and gentlemen, the President of the United States, John F. Kennedy, is dead. He was shot to death by an assassin in the streets of Dallas. He was 45 years old in his first term of office. He was shot as he rode in a motorcade through downtown Dallas. Governor John Connally of Texas was wounded by the assassin. The President and his wife had flown to Texas yesterday for a 2-day swing through 5 cities. The President, cradled in his wife's arms, had been rushed in his blood-spattered limousine to Parkland Hospital and taken to an emergency room. An urgent call went out for neurosurgeons and blood. He died at the hospital. Earlier reports had been coming into WOKY News that the President was dead long before we announced. These reports, however, were unconfirmed. Because of the magnitude of the situation, we had decided not to create any more panic news, as it were, by announcing that he was dead, but the report is not confirmed. We decided instead to wait until a definite word. Stay tuned to WOKY.
WOKY also featured national news feeds from the Mutual Broadcasting Network. WOKY once again rejoins Mutual to get reactions from shocked people on the streets.
And this is WOKY News. Once again, we rejoin the facilities of the Mutual Broadcasting System.
I think this is a terrible disgrace for our nation. And what do people think they're going to accomplish by assassinating the president? They chose Lincoln, but they didn't stop integration, and they won't now either.
I'm a Mexican, and I love Mr. Kennedy very much. He was the most wonderful president this country ever had.
He was marvelous, good man. He's still very sorry for his wife and his family.
He strikes me as shocking as the day they bombed Pearl Harbor, just walking around in a daze.
Comments coming in from all over the world through the facilities of Mutual Broadcasting System here at WOKY.
The mood at this time was a feeling of panic. We were seeing it on television and hearing it on radio. Here, WOKY reminded listeners not to panic.
We must, at this moment of crisis, remember not to panic in any sort of way, because it must have been a feeling of panic that caused this tragic day.
I had been doing newscasts on my all-night show from the day of the tragedy to after the funeral. As a nation, we were just getting over the tragic assassination of the president. The funeral was over, and here I am reporting the day's events on my radio show.
This is Bob Berry in the WOKY Milwaukee newsroom. Mrs. Jacqueline Kennedy and her 2 children are spending perhaps their last night in the White House. News Secretary Pierre Salinger says that he will announce today what the president's widow has planned for the future. After returning to the White House from her husband's funeral yesterday, Mrs. Kennedy met privately with 3 heads of state who had come to express their condolences. At Arlington National Cemetery, a detail of military policemen stand guard over the grave of John F. Kennedy. A temporary white picket fence surrounds the area, which is blanketed with flowers sent by scores of foreign nations. The eternal flame lit by Mrs. Kennedy yesterday casts a soft glow over the grave. The area will be under a 24-hour-a-day military guard for the next week. This is Bob Berry in the WOKY Milwaukee newsroom.
To wrap up our remembrance of the assassination of John F. Kennedy, here's my interview with Margarette Oswald.
Hello, Margarette Oswald? Yes, Mrs. Oswald, this is Bob Berry calling from WOKY Radio in Milwaukee. How are you today?
Fine, thank you.
Your son, Lee, Harvey Oswald, and you still feel that he was framed?
You're not phrasing your questions correctly to Margarette Oswald. Do I still feel like he was framed? I have never said I felt like my son was framed. I said positively my son was framed. Your questions are not being properly. You might question other prominent people correctly, but you're not questioning me, Margarette Oswald, correctly. I'm the underdog, and so go ahead and do what you damn please with news.
Well, Mr. Sessions. Okay.
Bob Berry calls the world. Mornings on Fun Lovin' Walking.
Thank you for listening to Bob Berry's Unearthed Interviews. Be sure to subscribe and rate our podcast on iTunes or wherever you find your podcasts. You can find all the episodes at WisconsinBroadcastingMuseum.org. Check out Bob Berry's book, Rock and Roll Radio Milwaukee. Book sale proceeds support Angels Kids Fund and Donate Life Wisconsin. The preceding program was made possible by a generous contribution from Terry Barn.